Non-incisional hernias are named based on their location in the abdominal wall. Epigastric hernias are defects in the abdominal wall located between the umbilicus and the xiphoid process. These hernias are usually small, but may be associated with multiple defects. They result from various factors like muscle weakness, congenitally weakened epigastric fascia, or increases in intra-abdominal pressure. Given the rarity of incarceration, repair of an epigastric hernia is indicated for symptomatic patients only. Next would be umbilical hernias, which may be congenital or acquired. Umbilical hernias are common in newborns, especially in premature infants. Most umbilical hernias close spontaneously by 5 years of age, and indications for repair include incarceration, symptomatic hernia, failure to decrease in size, or if the defect fails to close by the age of 5. In adults, umbilical hernias form because of increased abdominal pressure due to pregnancy, obesity, or ascites. Females are at a higher risk for this type of hernia. Small asymptomatic hernias may be followed clinically. However, if an umbilical hernia enlarges in size, causes symptoms, or incarcerates, surgical treatment should be offered. Hernias that occur along the arcuate line are known as Spigelian hernias. These are rare hernias, but they may form due to the anatomic weakness of lack of a posterior rectus sheath below the arcuate line. Given the high rate of incarceration, surgical repair is usually recommended. Hernias that develop at sites of previous abdominal incisions are known as incisional hernias. Up to 20% of midline incisions will develop hernias eventually. Vertical incisions and upper abdominal incisions are at a higher risk of hernia formation. Several patient-derived factors increase the risk of hernia, including diabetes, immunosuppressant use, obesity, smoking, malnutrition, and connective tissue disorders. Local operative factors may also be implicated, including technique, wound infection, or high tension at the time of closure. Take note that small defects pose a higher risk of incarceration and should be repaired. Surgical management of incisional hernias include either primary tissue or mesh repairs. Hernias can also be repaired via a laparoscopic or open approach. Simple suture repair is associated with a recurrence rate as high as 54%. Mesh repairs, however, are associated with a higher rate of infections. Mesh repair has become the standard for elective management of most incisional hernias. Mesh can be placed above the midline fascia or overlay, bridged across fascial defects, known as interlay, underneath the fascia or sublay, or within the abdominal cavity, underlay. The sublay technique is performed by developing the plane between the rectus muscle and the posterior sheath and affixing mesh in this space. The incidence of laparoscopic port site hernias is becoming more common. Given the size of the hernias, there is a substantial risk of bowel strangulation and ischemia. These hernias commonly present as Richter's hernia, or a hernia containing only a portion of the bowel wall. The most common site of herniation is at the umbilical incision, but it may be also found elsewhere. In adults, hernias usually occur in ports that are greater than 5 mm in size, but they can occur in any size ports in children. These are usually repaired via an open approach. Rectus abdominis diastasis or diastasis recti is an anatomic term referring to an abnormal separation of rectus muscles and a laxity at the linea alba. These can either be a congenital or acquired abnormality. This is not a true hernia as the midline fascia is intact, and as such, incarceration and strangulation do not occur. Risk factors for acquired rectus abdominis diastasis include conditions that elevate intra-abdominal pressure, including obesity and pregnancy, as well as conditions which weaken the abdominal wall, including connective tissue disorders or prior abdominal surgery. Most patients with diastasis recti can be diagnosed based on PE, where a fusiform bulge is usually apparent. This bulge worsens with contraction of the rectus muscles or Valsalva maneuver. If imaging is needed, ultrasound can be used to confirm diagnosis, and CT scan can also be used to measure the distance between muscle pillars. Rectus diastasis does not require surgical repair and may be improved via weight loss and exercise. Indications for repair include disability of abdominal wall muscular function or cosmesis. Surgical repair includes both open and laparoscopic plication of the rectus sheath, and mesh repair can also be done. Disruption of one of the branches of the inferior epigastric artery, as well as an inability to tamponade the hemorrhage, results in a rectus-sheath hematoma. This occurs commonly around the arcuate line. Trauma to the abdominal wall, including iatrogenic trauma with laparoscopic trocar placement, can lead to disruption of blood vessels. Vigorous contraction of the rectus muscle, either with coughing, sneezing, or exercise, can also induce hemorrhage formation. Other risk factors would be the presence of chronic pulmonary disease, as well as patients who are on anticoagulants. This condition presents with acute abdominal pain and a palpable abdominal mass. The pain usually increases with contraction of the rectus muscle. In addition, palpation of a mass that does not change during contraction of the rectus muscle, also known as Fothergill sign, is also associated with the rectus sheath pathology. The diagnosis should be confirmed via ultrasound or CT scan with intravenous contrast. Obtaining a type and screen, hemoglobin hematocrit, and coagulation factors are critical in the management of these patients. Treatment of patients with rectus sheath hematoma depends on the hemodynamic stability of the patient as well as the size of the hematoma. Hemodynamically stable patients with small hematomas, stable hemoglobin hematocrit levels, and normal coagulation factors may be observed without hospitalization. Hemodynamically stable patients with larger or bilateral hematomas and decrease in hemoglobin levels should be monitored in the hospital setting with serial hemoglobin determination, compression of the hematoma, and bed rest. While patients in hypovolemic shock should be aggressively resuscitated with the use of blood products and treated via angiographic embolization. In the event that angiographic intervention failed, surgical treatment should be done using operative evacuation of hematoma and ligation of bleeding vessels. Desmoid tumors are also known as aggressive fibromatosis. These are fibroblastic neoplasms with aggressive infiltrative behavior but no metastatic potential. Desmoid tumors are rare and usually occur sporadically. They are, however, also associated with familial adenomatous polyposis, or FAP, with an even greater risk in patients with Gardner syndrome. Risk factors for sporadic development of desmoid tumors include previous surgical incision, pregnancy, hormonal exposure, and trauma. Females have higher predilection, and diagnosis can be confirmed via core needle or incisional biopsy. Historically, the gold standard of treatment of abdominal wall desmoid tumors is margin negative resection with immediate mesh reconstruction. But now the NCCN suggests initial observation for patients with asymptomatic, non-life-threatening tumors. Surgery is indicated in patients with symptomatic disease, risk of invasion of surrounding structures, or enlarging tumors. Other adjuvant therapies may include radiation, chemo, and hormonal therapy. The omentum is a fibrous adipose apron providing support and protection of the intra-abdominal viscera. The greater omentum is a double-layered sheet of visceral fibroadipose tissue descending from the greater curvature of the stomach, covering the small intestines. The greater omental tissue connecting the stomach to transverse colon, as well as the stomach to the spleen, are known as the gastrocolic and gastrosplenic ligaments respectively. Forming the anterior boundary of the lesser sac, the lesser omentum extends between the liver and lesser curvature of the stomach. Also known as the hepatoduodenal and hepatogastric ligaments, the portal triad is located within the inferolateral margin of the lesser omentum. This free edge of lesser omentum forms the foramen of Winslow, which is used to encircle the portal triad during a Pringle maneuver. Initially described by a British surgeon as the policeman of the abdomen, the greater omentum is understood as a peritoneal defense organ. The omentum forms fibrin adhesions at sites of inflammation, effectively attempting to wall off peritoneal infections. The visceral fat of the greater omentum is also involved in metabolic functions of the body. Increased visceral fat, including the greater omentum, is an independent risk factor for insulin resistance and high triglyceride levels. Omental infarction may be primary or secondary depending on the etiology. Primary infarction may be caused by torsion of the omentum from sudden or forceful movements, thrombosis or vasculitis of omental vessels, or omental venous outflow obstruction. Secondary causes of torsion are most often due to hernias, tumors, or adhesions. This occurs most often in male and obese patients. For the diagnostic tests, ultrasound may demonstrate a hyperechoic, non-compressible intra-abdominal mass attached to the abdominal wall, while a CT scan demonstrates a streaking, whirling pattern of fatty tissue in the anterior abdomen. Omental infarction can be treated conservatively, but this leads to several possible complications, including abscess or adhesion formation. Laparoscopic exploration and dissection of infarcted tissue is the usual treatment of choice. Cystic lesions of the omentum are rare disorders related in pathogenesis to mesenteric cysts. These lesions present with vague abdominal pain or nausea or vomiting. They may also present as a lead point for omental torsion and infarction. CT scan and ultrasound are largely diagnostic and reveal a well-circumscribed cystic-appearing lesion arising from the greater omentum. A very small percentage may transform to malignancy. Most omental cysts are resected, especially if symptomatic, via open or laparoscopic approaches. Cysts may relapse if treated conservatively via laparoscopic unroofing or percutaneous drainage. Most omental neoplasms are metastatic disease. Ovarian cancer is the most common cancer to have omental involvement. Other metastatic cancers include gastrointestinal tract tumors, melanoma, endometrial cancer, and kidney cancer. Primary tumors of the omentum are exceedingly rare. Benign masses may include lipomas, myxomas, and desmoid tumors. Extra gastrointestinal stromal tumors are a rare malignant tumor of the omentum. The mesentery is a contiguous structure suspending and fixing bowel to the abdominal wall, providing housing for arterial, venous, nervous, and lymphatic structures. The resultant development of the white line of Todt along the lateral border of the ascending and descending large bowel provides an avascular fascial plane between the colon, its mesentery, and the underlying retroperitoneal space. The small intestine mesentery, transverse colon mesentery, and sigmoid colon mesentery remain mobile. Defects in the proper rotation and fixation of the bowel results in the spectrum of congenital disorders known as intestinal malrotation. In this scenario, the intestine and mesentery are simply suspended from vascular connection, making intestinal volvulus common. Defects that form in anatomical positions may act as routes for intestinal herniation. Common sites of herniation include the paraduodenal or mesocolic areas, leading to either acute or chronic intestinal obstruction in pediatric or adult populations. Areas where mesenteric attachment is incomplete may predispose patients to volvulus. Attachments of the cecum may degrade over time, leading to an area of laxity and possible twisting. The sigmoid mesentery can also increase in size over time, also leading to possible sigmoid volvulus. Rarely, other areas of the colon can develop volvulus if differential mesenteric lengths form. Sclerosing mesenteritis is a rare disorder characterized by idiopathic fibrosis of the mesentery, affecting hollow viscera as well as mesenteric vessels. This disease is part of a spectrum of inflammation and fibrosis, which is when localized is known as mesenteric lipodystrophy, and when diffuse is known as mesenteric panniculitis. The cause of this disease is unknown, but it may be instigated by antecedent abdominal surgery, an autoimmune disease, a paraneoplastic syndrome, a previous infection, or vascular insult. It is said that this disease is more common in males, and they may present with abdominal pain. Other symptoms include nausea and vomiting, weight loss, anorexia, and altered bowel habits. This may appear as a chronic or acute disorder. On PE, patients may be found to have tenderness and distension. Up to 50% of patients are found to have an abdominal mass that often transmits aortic pulsations. Abdominal CT with IV contrast is used to assist in diagnosis. The most common finding is that of a soft tissue mass with a higher density than normal mesenteric tissue. Two CT findings may add specificity. The tumor pseudocapsule refers to a hypodense zone around the associated fibrotic mass, and the fat ring sign refers to an area of preserved fat near mesenteric vessels coursing through areas of fibrosis. Pathologic confirmation is required to confirm the diagnosis. This usually requires laparoscopic or open biopsy to provide adequate tissue for confirmation. Patients who present with bowel ischemia may require bowel and mesenteric resection. If obstructive symptoms are dominant, intestinal bypass may be indicated. Aggressive surgical treatment is not indicated because in many cases, symptoms may improve with medical treatment or even without intervention. Steroids, hormonal therapy, colchicine, thalidomide, and cyclophosphamide have all been reported to be beneficial. Cysts are thought to be caused by disruption of the lymphatics in the mesentery, either by traumatic disruption, mechanical obstruction, or congenital lymphatic malformation. Most cysts are unilocular, but they also may have multiple loculations. Physical exam reveals an abdominal mass in up to 60% of patients. The classic Tilot sign is an abdominal mass lesion that is only mobile laterally, contrasting omental cysts, which are usually freely mobile in all directions. CT scan and ultrasound can be used to make an accurate diagnosis. Mesenteric cystic lymphangioma may present as numerous cysts on imaging. Most mesenteric cysts are treated surgically. Marsupialization and simple aspiration have high rates of recurrence and are generally discouraged. Benign lesions should be enucleated, and malignant cysts should be resected with clear margins. Resection can be performed either by a laparoscopic or open procedure. Primary mesenteric tumors are rare but represent several histologic patterns. Benign tumors include desmoid tumors, lipomas, and cystic lymphangiomas. The most common malignant neoplasm of the mesentery is lymphoma. Other malignant tumors of the mesentery include GIST, carcinoids, liposarcoma, leiomyosarcoma, malignant fibrous histiocytomas, lipoblastomas, or lymphangiosarcoma. Treatment of malignant mesenteric masses usually involves wide resection. The retroperitoneum is bounded by the peritoneum anteriorly, the iliopsoas and lumbar muscles posteriorly, the diaphragm superiorly, and the levator ani muscles inferiorly. It is divided into three spaces. The anterior pararenal space refers to the area anterior to the renal fascia but posterior to the peritoneum. This area contains the ascending and descending colon, the duodenum, and the pancreas. Posterior to this space is the perirenal space, which houses the inferior vena cava, the aorta, kidneys, and adrenal glands. The posterior pararenal space is in continuity with preperitoneal fat of the anterior abdomen. Infections of the retroperitoneum can be due to primary hematogenous spread of microbes or due to secondary infection from retroperitoneal or nearby organs. On physical exam, patients may present with erythema of the umbilicus or flank. Abscesses are usually found easily on CT scan of the abdomen with IV contrast. Treatment of retroperitoneal abscesses include source control via treatment of the underlying condition, drainage of well-defined collections, and IV antibiotic administration. Retroperitoneal fibrosis is a rare disease characterized by inflammation and fibrosis of the tissue of the retroperitoneum. The condition may either be idiopathic or due to a secondary cause, including aortic aneurysms, pancreatitis, certain drugs, malignancies, infections, retroperitoneal hematoma, radiation, surgery, asbestos, or tobacco use. It may also be associated with several autoimmune disorders. Idiopathic retroperitoneal fibrosis accounts for 70% of cases and is thought to be an immune-mediated disorder. Theories include exaggerated local reactions to aortic or iliac atherosclerosis or autoimmune deposition of fibroinflammatory cytokines, or it may also be a manifestation of IgG4-related disease. Patients may complain of dull or acute back or flank pain. Systemic complaints include anorexia, weight loss, nausea, vomiting, fever, and malaise. Decreased urinary output may ensue if the ureters become fibrotic. Because of renal artery impingement, patients are commonly hypertensive on exam. Other PE findings include lower extremity edema and diminished lower extremity pulses if the vessels of the lower extremities are compressed. New hydrocele or varicocele can also be associated with fibrosis of the retroperitoneum. Laboratory analysis is also nonspecific. If there is renal obstruction, patients may have elevated serum blood urea nitrogen and creatinine. ESR and CRP is elevated in most patients, and anti-nuclear antibodies may also be high. Contrast-enhanced CT scan is the modality of choice to visualize the extent of disease. MRI can also be used to clarify the extent. Renal ultrasound is used to document ureteral compression and hydronephrosis, while lower extremity ultrasound may show deep venous thrombosis. Pathologic examination of tissue is necessary to confirm the diagnosis and to rule out malignancy. Surgical treatment is aimed at relieving ureteral obstruction, either by ureterolysis or stenting. For patients with idiopathic retroperitoneal fibrosis, corticosteroids are the mainstay of treatment. They are usually started on 1 month of high-dose prednisone, followed by maintenance therapy and subsequent taper. Alternatively, tamoxifen can be used if patients have contraindications to steroids. If steroids fail to cause regression of disease, patients can be started on immunosuppressant medications, including methotrexate, azathioprine, cyclophosphamide, or mycophenolate mofetil. Interval imaging studies are usually obtained after 1 month to evaluate for efficacy. That concludes my lecture for the abdominal wall, omentum, mesentery, and retroperitoneum. My sole reference is the Schwartz Principles of Surgery, 11th edition. Thank you for your kind attention.